Welcome. My name is Mark Depew. I'm the Director of Oral History at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library. Today is Thursday, September 4th, 2014, and I'm here sitting with Gary Price. Good morning, Gary.
Good morning.
Last time Gary and I met, we talked about his fascinating experiences about the end of the Vietnam War in 1975 as a Marine aviator who just happened to be there helping with the evacuation of refugees and military personnel, etc. Well, today we get to pick up the rest of your story. And so let's talk about what happens immediately after when you return back to the United States. Or actually to Okinawa, wasn't it?
Okinawa, yes. In fact, on the way back, we were tapped. We went to the Philippines and we headed back to Okinawa. And en route was the Mariguez issue. And our ship turned for a few hours towards the Mariguez island, and to maybe we could be that evacuation or rescue of the ship. But it worked out to where we were not. Continued on to Okinawa. And that was in May time frame, and I rotated back to the States in late June time frame. Went to be an instructor in Pensacola, Florida, flying Hueys and HT-18 the squadron at Naval Air Station Whiting Field in Milton, Florida, which is about a half hour north of Pensacola. Was there for 2 years.
After flying in CH-46s, what was it like flying Hueys, which is, that's the quintessential aircraft for the Vietnam War.
Yes. In fact, it was not having flown a tail rotor. That was a challenge itself. The tail rotor issue, which I had none in a 46, didn't have that squirreliness of concern of winds and all that. Still concerned, but not as much as before. Like a little sports car in comparison to driving a Cadillac. It was a fun airplane to fly. I enjoyed it. I flew for 2 years, and then I I applied for the college degree program. Went to University of West Florida for 2 years or 18 months, and got my bachelor's degree in business.
So the Marine Corps took care of you finally getting a bachelor's degree.
That's right. Went back to school full time. It was great.
What'd you major in?
Management. It was fairly simple course to get through that being, and I tapped into the ROTC at the college and found out who, where, what, when, and all that. So I hung out with them and drank their coffee and got smarter, street smart from college standpoint, which has been out of the realm for several years.
You didn't tell them any war stories while you were there, were you?
Not like that, no. Or tell them what airplane to fly if they were going to do that. No, didn't influence them in that regard.
Was this a naval ROTC program?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, how did Susan like you being back home and in a regular, actually someplace that she might enjoy living?
Well, when we came back after that, we were married about 14 months, and then Okinawa was 13 months. And so we really weren't sure if we were going to pick up where we left off a little bit and renew or what. It was just one of those strange moments. So, but as it worked out, we didn't know what to do, so I came back to Rockford, Illinois, picked her up, and we drove to Pensacola. And and we ended up going there and finding a place to buy, and we bought a house, and then had both our kids there, and got my college degree. So we had a great time. Pensacola was, in fact, we lived in the past for almost 20 years thinking we were going to retire in Pensacola. It just didn't work out either. But she loved it.
By this time, were you thinking that you might want to stay with the Marines, make it a career?
Well, yes and no. Before I went to school full time, most of my friends were getting out and going to the airlines, helicopter type, fixed wing type. Didn't really matter. They were hurting for airline pilots. Well, unfortunately, I had the airline tickets, my commercial and civilian fixed wing and instruments, but I didn't have a college degree. So they weren't taken without college degrees. So there was another drive to go back to school because I couldn't go to the airlines. If that's my true desire to go to, I couldn't get out to do that. So I went back to school. And so now I had a 4-year payback. So yes, I was sticking around for another 4 years at least.
Which would put you into how many years by the time that was done?
Close to 8 or 9, 10 years. So at that point, I was pretty well set. And every time I moved, every time I got promoted, it was another 2 years, 1 year commitment. So I really didn't finish paying off all my required duties until I had about 18 years in. Then I was the CO of a squadron. So it really
Which is
didn't
the
matter.
culmination of anybody's career.
That's
yeah.
right. That's right. So I wasn't going to get out before then.
What did you do then at the follow-on tour after you got done with college?
After I finished college, we packed up. I had orders to HMM 268 in Tustin, now Tustin. It was called Santa Ana, Marine Corps Station Santa Ana when I left in the 70s, early 70s. And when I came back, it was called Marine Corps Air Station Tustin. Santa Ana is a little bit north of where we were at, and Tustin's a little bit east-west a little bit. So anyway, Tustin, so I was there. HMM 268 was a Huey squadron, decommissioned after Vietnam Wars, and now being recommissioned as a CH-46. So we were, quote, a brand new squadron. We were getting new people. I was one of 5. I was the operation officer as a captain. And so we were at the ground level trying to build, what do we need? We need seats, we need chairs, we need this, we need that for operations, computers, and whatever it may be. So we were building up. We had no airplanes yet. You know, we were still playing around with office stuff and maintenance stuff, getting people put together, the right people put together for make the squadron a squadron. And then came the helicopters. And so,
Were you expecting brand new helicopters or rebuilt ones?
no, we were expecting helicopters. No, they quit making them, and so I'm not sure where they came from, but I know we got air. Well, I know where they came from. They went from 18 to a squadron to 12, and so all the excess was farmed out in different areas, and so that's kind of where we got.
Well, knowing the way the military works,
Yes.
you got everybody else's junk, I would think.
It took it was a challenge to the maintenance to get equipped, ready to go, and start flying again. Yes, and but that's where they came from.
What time frame are we talking about here?
We're talking about 1979.
So what years were you in college?
I got to Pensacola in 75, and in 77 I went to school for 18 months. So that makes it 78, late 70, early 79. So that's when we went to California.
The reason I'm asking for the dates here is because this is the time period that if you were in the regular Army, and I was during that time, they considered this the hollow Army. The downside of the Vietnam War, the morale was very low, discipline problems,
Right.
equipment problems. There was oftentimes not enough money for training or fuel or ammunition, things like that. Were you seeing some of that?
Some of that, particularly in the, it picked up more obviously when I got to California, but we saw some of that in Pensacola. What they have a pilot requirement, PTR, pilot training requirements, based on the needs of the Marine Corps and the different communities and all that. And we would jump on it early on. We'd fly students till they couldn't fly anymore, had to give them some rest. But we ran out. They just wasn't there. And then when we did have them, we didn't have the parts, or we didn't have the fuel. And so it was always kind of a catch up at the end of the fiscal year. We had the airplanes, but we're still struggling with fuel and a few other parts that we needed to keep the airplanes going. We had 100 Hueys out there. You think we have enough, but we were cannibalizing a lot to make that work because the parts weren't there. And that carried over when I got to the Marine side in Tustin. It was the same way. We were flying, but you know, they were used to fly 500 hours a month. We got down to about 200 hours a month because of fuel, parts, but the mission didn't go away. We still had to fly the requirements. It's just that you had now quit training, or you had to quit doing other things to make that work. And every time we got an add-on mission, wait a minute, time out, we needed either more fuel to make it work, and then say, well, we have to figure this all out. Meanwhile, you plan on it anyway, and then something would come up when we could get the fuel to go fly. And that's how it was in that time frame until Reagan came on board.
Do you remember any morale problems that you had among the troops or the officers during that period?
Not really. In 268, we were all kind of a new squadron developed. We took over the old patch, made it a new patch, and We were, the only, I guess, depressing thing was that we were expecting nice, ready room, airline type seats, and we didn't get any of that stuff, you know. Oh, you're a new squadron, you're going to get all new, you know, office stuff. Well, no, that was maybe a thought, but nothing came through. We had regular fold-down chairs, and we had regular old blackboards to do things with, and so it was a struggle in that regard as a, quote, new squadron being stood up. We didn't get the new administrative stuff in the office areas to make it right.
I would think you'd be the ideal guy, having both CH-46 and Huey experience.
Well, unlike probably other services, once you were set into your, what they call MOS, your specialty, beyond what mine was a 46 pilot, you didn't have the opportunity, nor were you authorized to fly something else, unless you just happened to be a co-pilot, and that didn't happen very often. So yeah, I may have flown Hueys, but we have plenty of more experienced Huey pilots flying, you know, Marine Hueys, and so there was really no need for me. I'm just trying to get back into 46 so I can be a respectable, credible pilot in my community, which I've been out now for 4 years. So I had to go back to a little refresher course with the refresher training program, flying and academically, to get back into the aircraft. When you're out of the aircraft for over a year, you're required to go back through an academic period and a flight phase.
It's not like riding a bicycle, it just comes back automatically?
Yes, but the academics and all the other stuff is a little bit tougher to come by as you get older, you know, and trying to remember a few things. And the aircraft has a few quirks, and one of the few quirks was taxiing. It didn't have a steering wheel like the 47, the Chinook has, and it has one nose wheel in front, and it's a canister with an oleo strut, and you had to pull the stick back to get the oleo to extend a little bit, and then bounce it to the right or to the left to go left and right. And then it's that skill, feeling where that magic spot is, and every aircraft was different in where that feel was. A little bit of power, a little bit off power to get the aircraft to turn. And once you got it turning the way you want, you stabilize it, and then it would just continue on. In the worst case is you push it too far, you hit the bottom and it bounces, or you pull too high and the aircraft comes off the ground. So you had to learn that, and that was the biggest thing to learn in a 46.
Did the older 46s, were the controls a little bit sloppier?
Don't remember that. I really don't.
I'm just,
yeah,
just was curious.
No, don't remember.
Did you have any additional duties?
Eventually, when I got in HMM 268, after about a year, they had they had a requirement of weapons and tactics instructor, WTIs. And the Marine Corps requirement was 2 per squadron. And so I was in operations, and I had flight time comparatively to the other pilots because I had Huey time, or at least instructor time. And so I got sent to Yuma, Arizona for about 8 weeks. And the requirement for the squadron to do that was to support me with 4 aircraft, and maintenance people support the aircraft.
Going out to Yuma, you went with 4 aircraft?
Yes, 1 per 4. And so as it worked out, there was 10 of us, 10 students in 46, so 10 times 4 is what you had, and all the maintenance people to make that happen. So I was trained into nap of the earth flying. I was also got into night vision goggles for the first time, and it was a full face type. We were all looking at cutaways where you can see below, but the full face are the ones that the tank drivers used down at the Camp Pendleton. They actually covered your whole face so you couldn't see. So you were looking at focusing one eye inside, one eye outside, or vice versa, or one out and one in. Light control was an issue. All that for night vision goggles. We did phase 1, which is basically learning to fly, takeoff and landings, and a little bit of navigation with them. And got introduced to air combat maneuvering, helo versus fixed wing, and particularly the F-4s who thought they were ruling the sky, and when they couldn't shoot us down, it was kind of an ego for us, you know, to be able to survive those attacks. But that's what the course was, and the academic package went along with that. So when I came back to the squadron, my requirement was to not only teach my fellow aviators the academics, but also now as an instructor, take them out and fly nap of the earth, do night vision goggles.
Well, night vision goggles, ruling the night has for a long time been something the American military has taken pride in. But I think perhaps a lot of viewers wouldn't know what nap of the earth means.
Nap of the earth is flying at the contour level, 50 feet, 10 feet for some communities. We were flying at 50 feet. And so you take a map and you look at the contours of the map and you figure out ravines and valleys, and that's how you navigate it, looking outside, reading the map and watching where these mountains are. And you had a little bit of a heading for a long ways. You may have a little time element to figure out how much time to go, but you're basically reading the map to follow from contour to contour to mountain peak to valley to get to your landing zone. So the idea was that you stayed below the mountain ridges so the bad guys with surface-to-air missiles wouldn't be able to shoot at you.
Below the tree line?
Below the tree line. And so masking below the ridge line, masking below the, getting down the creek beds, the Cobras and the Hueys were a little bit smaller platform footprint. They can get down about 10 feet and just scoot along those river beds down below the tree lines. And we would be around 50 feet. We can get lower, but for training purposes we were 50. And so we would get below the ridges as much as we could to be safe. And the whole idea was to mask yourself against the enemy.
Fun flying?
Fun flying. Well, doing that with night vision goggles was even more fun. Because you did that during daytime, and that was okay. But at night, doing the same thing, reading the map with your full face, so you're trying to focus your goggles to look inside a map with a red lens, and then tell your pilot which way to go left now after you get to this point here and turn right here after this point, and then we should flare out and then we'll fly. And that's a discussion you had in the cockpit. So not only do you have a skill to learn to read the map, but to communicate that to your pilot so he'll be ahead of the game, where to turn, when not to turn, and all that.
You got to be on your game then.
Yeah, on your game. That's right. There was no, you really had a challenge during day and night nap of the earth because you really had an issue with terrain, and we in some areas where we were above 50 feet, but we had close walls, so tip-hat plane of the aircraft rotors was a concern. And but no, that was the survival tactics, was to stay masked day and night.
Any accidents that you recall?
Later in life, yes, we had several. Unfortunately, like any other community, new skills and so forth, and getting too low, hitting the ground, not communicating very well, flying formation, hitting each other mid-airs.
In other words, this is dangerous business.
Yes, it is.
Peacetime training or wartime, it's dangerous.
Yes, the old cliche, we were saying back in those days, shit happens. Well, it doesn't happen. It was for a reason, so we changed that cliche to shit doesn't always happen. There's a reason why it happened. You got to go back and find out where it started and try to prevent either that cause and see if you can fix it for future. And that's what we did after every accident, particularly in those areas. And every time we had a nap of the earth, night vision goggle, air combat maneuvering accident or incident, it was another threat against stopping the program. And those are always new challenges from a political standpoint. We don't need to do that stuff. We didn't do it before, we survived. And what are we flying so low for? What are we flying at night so much? Well, I remember flying night without goggles, and I look back on it, it's just, even now, a scary thing, because I fly now with night vision goggles in my little air medical flights versus when I first came on not having them. Didn't think nothing of it. Then, after having them, you're thinking, oh man, how did I survive the first year of this?
I assume you're not flying nap of the earth right now.
No, I'm not.
Well, let me pull you up from
Okay.
nap of the earth all the way up to the international level, and I wanted to know if you remember the Iranian hostage crisis. Were you paying any attention to that at all? And that was late 1979.
Yes and no. Yes, we were watching it on TV. It was obviously the big news. But more personally, that I had friends who all of a sudden didn't come to work. 53 pilots didn't come to work. Don't know why. No one knew why. It wasn't for several months thereafter we found out where they were. Key personnel from the 53 community was pulled, basically, from what I heard, pulled from their houses and homes from works, and they were tapped to go do some training. And no one knew where, no one knew what they were doing, and or how long they'll be gone. And so I don't think, I've been told, even the family knew, their families knew where they were at for months. And later on we found out that they were out somewhere in the desert flying the 53s. Pilots were flying long nap of the earth flying, night vision goggle flying. They had some new nav systems in the aircraft that no one had yet, that they were flying from maybe 11 o'clock midnight to light, and they were fly as far as they can go one way, different areas over towns and around the communities, and then they come back. And they did that forever, landing in the desert next to C-130s, refueling practices, forward air refueling, FARPs we call them, and they were doing all that stuff and trying to get all that down and get their communications, their planning based on, as we found out later on, the rescue. Now, I was fortunate later on, jumped the chain in this subject. I got reassigned to work at the group, Marine Air Group 16, and I worked for a guy named Jim Schaefer. Well, Jim Schaefer was one of those 53 pilots that was yanked out of his house and trained. Jim Schaefer was also one of the few 53 pilots that made it to the refueling place.
We're talking about, was it the Mission Desert 1?
Desert 1. The plan was 53s were going to land. They came off the ship, land at a point A, and they were going to meet up with C-130s to refuel. And from there, I believe there was going to be a go, no-go, and continue on for the mission.
To rescue the hostages.
Rescue the hostages. As I understand it, several of the Huey 53s didn't make it. They got caught in a sandstorm, had to force themselves down, had mechanical problems. I think there's like 7 53s, 7 or 8, that was planned on going, and I think only about 3 made it. The C-130s were there. Jim Schaefer was also the one, unfortunately, that crashed a helicopter against a C-130, and that's where we lost a few Marines. He was a pilot. His co-pilot got burned real bad. Jim kind of had, I didn't see any scars or burn marks. I think he got burned maybe on his body, but he survived it. But some Marines in the back did not. Some of his crew did not make it. So, and even at that point, and this was now maybe 83 time frame, he still couldn't talk about any of the stuff he did, where he went, how he did it. And I would just try to pull things out of him.
He was prohibited, or he just wasn't willing to talk about it?
Prohibited. I don't think he was ever released to talk about the details for a long, long time.
Well, what we've just been talking about, the Iranian hostage crisis, the disastrous attempt to rescue them, the horrible economy that was going on at the time, all contributed to Jimmy Carter's defeat and Ronald Reagan being elected president in November of 1980. And what I wanted to ask you then, how did things change after Reagan came in and you had that build up of the military again?
Well, just like Christmas almost. It was, we had money, and we were back to 400 to 500 plus hours. Again, the requirements didn't go away. We still had exercises to do, but we had more money. I say more money in the flight time category. The squadron commander doesn't get, you got $100,000 or $1 million to work with. You get hours. You got 500 hours assigned a month. What you do with them is what you are challenged in your leadership and organization planning. You got your mission requirements, but then you got maintenance requirements to do, but you have training to do. And we were foregoing the training in the past. So we flew the missions, we flew the test flights, we flew the required items to keep us legal, our instrument check rides, our NATOPS, our aircraft check rides. But when it came to doing nap of the earth, doing confined area landings, doing formation flying, doing some sea landings, water landings, that wasn't part of it. There was no money for that. So now we had opportunity to go train. So a lot of our co-pilots who were just getting stuff whitewashed or just not getting the training, now we were going back doing the basic trains that they should have done way back when. And so that was the morale booster, was that we get to fly some training flights, which was good. And parts became available. So the flight time, the parts, the aircraft availability became better because we can keep the aircraft flying. We weren't cannibalizing, taking parts off one aircraft for another one all the time, back and forth, which now our poor maintenance guys were working, 6, 7 hours for every 1 hour. This airplane had another problem. We'll take all these parts off. We'll put them on this aircraft. We'll get this aircraft. So they'd be working day and night to get another aircraft fixed just to cannibalize parts. Now that wasn't required. So all the parts, the flight time, the training, and we're getting more people. So it was a real big morale booster for all of us. And just like night and day when he came on board, just like, there was no problem anymore for money.
Were you getting better recruits, better enlistees by that time?
It seemed like it. Of course, in the aviation, you didn't really see too many bad Marines. I mean, they were all pretty smart. Your mechanics, avionics, flight equipment guys, and so you had, and of course, your staff was basically the same cut, and so they had maybe a little bit of a higher caliber Marine, if you want to call it, who had to have a higher aptitude to pass the test, and so forth. So you always had. I don't remember a whole lot of disciplinary problems in those squadrons. There were some, but nothing like I heard in the future and heard from the ground side of the house.
I want you to walk through then the next couple steps in your career in the early and mid 1980s time frame.
Well, I was at HMM 268, and we deployed 2 times to Okinawa for 6 months. They were called unit deployments. So I deployed in the 80, and I deployed in 82. And when I came back after that, I had already gone to Weapons and Tactics Training Course at Yuma and back. And so after the 83, 84 time frame, I got very fortunate. I went to a school, Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island. It was a real feather because I haven't been to a Marine school. So I went to Newport, Rhode Island, Naval War College, and was there for a year. Got my master's on the side, so now I got educated again.
Is that how do you say the university?
Salve Regina University. It used to be an all-girls school way back when. And a lot of the...
What's a Marine doing in an all-girls school, huh?
I'm just lucky, I guess. But as it worked out, we found out that all the instructors, the challenge was they accepted 80% of all my grades and units from the War College. And I only took 3 classes to finish it out for the year to get my master's. And Naval War College was an accredited school, given A's and B's and so forth. And so I had to get a B, which was a challenge because most of my friends who didn't need it, didn't want it, go to school. They can get C's or D's and pass, and then they just did the minimum, it seemed like, to get by, where I had to do the extra study because I had to get a B. And because if I couldn't get the B, then it wouldn't be transferable, then I'd be in trouble. So I had the culture shock of reading and writing and studying, after not having done it for, a long, long time. And my poor wife paid the price because she was my sounding board and all my writing and typing, and she would correct it and I'd be retyping. Of course, back then the typing was manual typewriters because computers weren't around yet. And so we were required to read from 15 to 2,000 words a week. Plus, I had 3 papers a week to do, and
pages a week.
Pages, yeah, pages. And so, but anyway, that was a challenge, and so it was a fun time. I spent most of my time in my little cubicle at work, and days in and weekends. When the wife got to go to a few of the fun things, Boston and New York for some plays and travels and sightseeing. So anyway, I went to school there for a year, and got my master's at Salve Regina. I did get everything. Well, I remember one time I took this test. Carl von Clausewitz on war was the study guide. And when I took the midterm test with about 5 questions on Clausewitz, I remember getting my test answers back the following week. And the colonel called me in and says, "Gary, how do you think you're doing?" I says, "Sir, I think I'm struggling. I'm not going to make it." And he says, "Nah, you're right where we want you, And so I got my paper back and it says, "Nice try, Gary, but you didn't answer the question," and gave me a B, one of those things. I said, okay, I'm at the point where I'm no different from anybody else. And so,
was that a bit of a gift, getting the B?
I think so. I wrote about 8 pages on it trying to answer the question.
Well, von Clausewitz, he's a requirement for anybody in the military.
Yep.
You had to be missing the flying, though.
Well, yeah, I didn't do any flying, but I was so overwhelmed with studying that I didn't get a chance. In fact, I missed a lot of the little social things because there was opportunities to do things in Newport, and I just didn't take. I was too worried, I guess you call it, of not passing or trying to write the answers or the questions out. Like we had study questions to answer, and we would type them out, and then in class we would pass them around and exchange papers, and then that's what our midterm was based on. So I was trying to do good by the questions I answered and then pass them out to the other fellow students and all that. So I spent a lot of time home on weekends and nights doing that. And the wife, when she got back, she was, we had 2 little kids at that time, so her hands were full. And, but yeah, we were looking forward. From there, I got assigned to, I was going to go to headquarters Marine Corps, but things changed. Things fell through.
Headquarters Marine Corps meaning the Pentagon?
No, headquarters Marine Corps in Quantico.
Quantico. Okay.
Now, Washington, D.C., it's next to the Pentagon headquarters, the Navy annexes, I think they call the building. That fell through, and so I ended up going to Yuma, to the place that I had my weapons and training and instructor course, WTI class. The squadron that did that course was called Marine Aviation Weapons Training Squadron 1, MAWTS 1, MAWTS-1. Marine Aviation, one squadron, the only kind of its kind. It was a conglomerate of ideas from what they call Marine Force Pacific, Marine Force Land, MARFOR Pacific. They both had individual tactical schools, so they combined them into one, and they had representatives from every aviation skills, I guess. Every pilot, every aircraft, Hueys, 53s, 46s, and then we had an Army pilot, and we had a Navy pilot and an Air Force pilot, and then we had all the fixed wing communities. We had all the air command and control system people, all there to represent all 7 functions of Marine Air, and instructors. And they developed the foundation, so when these students came with, like my case, 4 aircraft and maintenance people, we went from probably about 150 people to almost, almost 15 to 2,000 people, and the ramp went from empty to the whole Yuma Air Base was covered with our jets and aircraft. You're looking at 46s alone with 10 students, and every other community had the same issues.
I know that during this time frame, late 70s, but especially in the early 80s, in the Army at least, this was the time when there was a lot of doctrinal development going on and focusing, getting away from the Vietnam era doctrine and designing something else. Was that something that was going on at Yuma at the time when you were there?
In fact, I taught Marine aviation doctrine so they knew what they were deviating from, because it wasn't one of those knowledge things that and there was no teaching of what aviation doctrine, how to employ. And so we taught aviation doctrine, and we're saying at this school, what you plan and what you do, it's open game. Whatever you think is right. Here's your threat. Based on what the threat can do to you, how are you going to get from point A to point B with your battalion to offload? And how are you going to defend that from the fast movers and air command and control side of the house to get your troops and people there safely and protect them while they're on the ground? And so people were trying 4 different routes and groups of helicopters and escort it to a single route with the whole conglomerate of all those were on the table for them to play with and try and learn in trials and tribulations of all that.
You mentioned the threat. What was the threat you were working against?
Well, back then it was still the Soviets. Their whole and the Soviets as well as the Soviet weapons, because I taught Soviet anti-aircraft AAA, because I call them the raghead countries, all the other countries had those weapons. They may not have the Soviet guy on the trigger, but all the weapons that had the same capability potentially was in the hands of somebody else, the third world countries, or the satellite countries that the Russians worked with or were selling weapons to, from Iran to Syria, to Iraq. All those countries had those weapons.
So are you working on the assumption that, one, the threat was probably going to outnumber what you had, and that the equipment was pretty close to par?
Yes.
That was the world that you were trying to devise.
We were
the
looking at
doctrine.
if there was a AAA weapon, anti-aircraft weapon, and it shoot, accurately, within seconds of acquisition on radar and putting rounds on target within 10 seconds, then we assume the worst, that those third world countries, Syria, whoever may have them, can do the same thing. So that was the threat.
Well, that's an attention grabber, I would think.
Yes. When you look at Grenada, which happened in the 80s when I was at Yuma, and you look at the weapons with Soviet weapons, it shot down several of the helicopters, and these were third world countries who just happened to have the weapons. So you can't ignore the weapon from what it can do, no matter who had it. The capability of the weapons, and is probably in the hands of who was operating it. I mean, it'll still shoot, it'll still knock you down if it hits you, but at the same time, they had to see you, find you, and acquire you to pull the trigger, and that was what we were trying to avoid, being seen.
What was your specific assignment while you were there?
When Yuma, I was a senior at that time. I was a senior CH-46 pilot. There was 3 of us, so I was in charge of 3 of us, but I had the 46 community. And I had the largest, I had 10 students on the average 2 times a year, and did it every year. And so the syllabus that we worked out for the CH-46 pilots, it was what me, Jim, and Rick, we sat down and we planned out in detail. And the community eventually, every community did the same thing. And then I became the head helo guy. And so now I was in charge of all the helicopters and coordinating what they were doing, and Jim Sliney took over the 46 community, being in charge of that. And then, after another year, I became the operations officer of the whole organization. And I had looked at one of my last, I felt pretty proud about, was that I was able to coordinate 5 B-52s from the East Coast, escorted by a squadron of F-16 as the threat to our prominent air mission with helos and our jets and so forth. And so I was able to coordinate all that in a mission that we had, real dissimilar aircraft. And of course the B-52s came in because we had the Chocolate Mountain Range just north of Yuma, and they can drop live ordnance. And live ordnance dropping is pretty rare in the United States. And there's a couple of ranges, and we had one. So we says, come over here, you can drop your ordnance, free of charge of anything. And if you'll fly this profile and fly this, and F-16s, and so out of Luke Air Force Base, matched them all up, and it was fun for those guys as much as it was for us.
Wasn't the F-16 pretty new to the inventory at that time?
At that time, yeah. So to get them, we were getting them onesie twosies for what we call dissimilar aircraft. The jet guys were getting them for air combat maneuvering, ACM, and we were getting the F-16s once in a while to do the helo versus fixed wing as well. And so to get them to be able to fly as a squadron, escorting bombers, and then we had to plug them in our profile, how we're looking at them, and then we, based on that threat, we'd be planning our mission from our combat air patrol missions, CAPs, all the way back to our air defense on the ground, and to our helo escorts, and because it all revolved around getting the ground guys from point A to point B for the mission.
From what you're saying, it sounds like you're really at the ground level, developing, upgrading the tactics, learning the process. Is that?
That's correct, because we sat there. When I was a head helo guy, one of the key products we produced was the assault support manual, which included air combat maneuvering, which included Nappy of the Earth, which included night vision goggles. Up until then, there was no manual for us to look at. For a helo guy in a squadron to be looking at what to plan for, how to plan using night vision goggles, and all that. So we wrote that manual. And so that was another thing we wrote. And we wrote the air combat maneuvering manual because there was none. Helo versus jets, helo versus fixed helo. And we would go out and experiment and try those different maneuvers and so forth while we had the aircraft. So we were on the ground floor back in the mid-'80s, producing this.
What were the lessons learned? Anything that really sticks with you today?
Well, the helo versus healer was a cluster. It's like, cats fight. You just can't, we can disengage from the jet guys. When they pull over, they go up and come back around. We can go hide. We can do something to help ourselves. Delay them coming back, maybe get out of the way, maybe be able to get some help. Helo versus a Hind,
which was the main Soviet attack
correct.
helicopter.
You couldn't get away because you can escape the first one, but they can turn just like where you're turning, and there's no way to get away from them.
Did they have Hind helicopters you were working against?
No. Though we did train the Utah National Guard in air combat maneuvering, certify them as such. And they came back to be what they call our aggressor helos. Painted a little differently, but they knew, so they could engage us, and we could do some maneuvering initially, and be comfortable that they knew that we, what to do from their standpoint and us for our standpoint. So we had dissimilar aircraft. They were our Army Cobra versus our Marine Cobras, which was a different paint scheme, single engine versus our dual, and all that. So, but no, we did that, and it was kind of fun. They came down every class, and they'd be our aggressor Cobras.
Any other stories you remember from that tour?
No, that was, well, the only other thing when I was the operations officer, I did get the award from the Navy League, the Holland M. Smith Award, Holland Smith as they call them, and I got to go back to Jackson, Florida for the award ceremony. So
what'd you get that award for?
As the operations officer.
So one operations officer in the Marine Corps aviation is assigned each year, or what?
They picked out one operations guy for the year for that award, correct, and I was able to get it. Well, from what I did that one year, from activities and what I was responsible for, what we accomplished, all that was written up well and submitted. The previous Butch, I think it was one of the previous operations officers, the two previous didn't get it. And they apply for every year. It's one of those Navy League awards, and so I felt pretty fortunate, felt pretty good about getting it.
What was the thing that contributed to you actually getting the award? Those manuals that you were talking about developing?
We did do some first time things. We did write the manual. We did write the air combat maneuvering manual, the assault support manual. We did have some significant support with B-52s and the F-Squadron F-16s. That didn't hurt, and we had we developed what they call the VIP course. In other words, all those COs who had the airplanes and had those students that came, we developed a week course just for them so they could see what we're doing, so they can have a better understanding, so when the WTI went back to the squadron, they would understand what they're supposed to be doing, what they can be doing, and how they can do it. And this was a way for the CO to see how he can best support that training back at his squadron. So we gave them a 2-day crash course in academics, and we gave them 3 days of flying, which they all liked too. And so, but we had NBC, CBS, we had all the big news people there, almost every class, and they go out and they'd be filming and watching and all this stuff, and there'd be some TV film footage on, from what we're doing exercise-wise, because we did occupy, and of course it's a big boost for the economy because we bring in, almost 1,000, 1,500 people to support all this, and so they were living on base, off base, and of course we were eating in the community, so it was a big boost for the economy as well. So anyway, timing might have been everything as well, but we did do a lot of work that one year that contributed.
How do you top that assignment then? What's next?
Well, I left there to be the XO, the executive officer of HMM 161 in Tustin. So
Tustin, what state?
Marine Corps Air Station, Tustin in California.
Okay.
So went back to Marine Corps Air Station Tustin. I was there for HMM 268, and then I'm back to Tustin for HMM 161.
And all these numbers and letters, those are specific units that you're
Yes.
assigned to.
Different squadrons. And so HMM is helicopter, marine, medium. HMH, helicopter, marine, heavy. And HMLA is a helicopter, marine, light attack. Anyway, so HMM 161. So I was the executive officer for that, and we ended up took a cruise. First cruise I've had. I've been to Okinawa now 3 times, and the Hawaii squadrons were doing the cruises aboard ship. Well, they rotated that to where the West Coast were doing the ship cruises. So we went on board ship. The LHA Bellawood was our ship to go on. We had a few exercises.
I think we got a picture up right there on it.
Yes, and so we were aboard that. We had
fairly new ship at the time?
It was fairly new, to my knowledge, and it was. We had 12 helicopters. We had 4 Cobras. We had 4 Hueys. We had 4 53s, and we had 6 AV-8s. And then we had, that was the ACE, Air Combat Maneuvering, so we were task organized. We had the air LAD people, low altitude air defense system. We had all those people, so we were a pointy edge of the sword, if you want to call it, as we floated. We had, that was the aviation combat element, and we had a battalion reinforced, so they had all the ground elements with them. Logistically was there to support it, so the Bellawood was a command ship. So
the command ship for
this the admiral in charge of this amphibious force, the ARG, Amphibious Ready Group, was aboard our ship.
Was this part of a fleet that would be
part of a fleet that we never did see the other ships, but we saw about 4 or 5 of our ships. From our ship, there was an LPD, another grunt infantry level, the LST, which is more logistical support, and maybe 2 LPDs out there, and we floated around about 4 or 5 ships as in
the Pacific.
In the Pacific. And we cruised out of San Diego, drove to Okinawa. We were there for a short time, a few hours. Then we were involved in an exercise in South Korea. Crashed a helicopter there in the exercise. Then we went to Hong Kong for a few days, then the Philippines for a few days, and then we went to Australia, then back to Hawaii.
And essentially showing some American muscle in that region of the world.
That's right. Just a standard cruise. We were supporting different countries, and we had some exercises with different parts from Australia. We worked with them on some exercises, and we were going to go to Guam, but something was going off in the Central America area, and we cut that short and we were out to Hawaii, and we were never involved, but they didn't know at the time. So we went back to Hawaii, then I flew the advanced party, so I flew back to the States early, and the other guys came about a week and a half later aboard ship.
Well, at this time, you're a major?
I was a lieutenant colonel.
When did you get promoted to lieutenant colonel?
I was in Yuma. I was a major shortly after I got there, and I was a lieutenant colonel 4 years later, and because I was a lieutenant colonel when I went to the squadron, HMM 161.
As a lieutenant colonel, was that the point in time when you'd be eligible as a Marine aviator to take command of a squadron?
Yes, yes.
And that's the thing that all of you guys are vying for, is it not?
That's right. That was a key thing. You know, it's funny because I called a friend of mine when I was in Yuma. Bobby Joe Garner was there, and he went to a squadron. Several squadron COs were relieved throughout the fleet for different things.
For misconduct or
misconduct,
bad performance?
Maybe not doing the job, incompetencies, you name it. And so I called Bobby Joe up because I didn't know. I said, man, do I want to be a CO now? All my people I knew were being relieved. I don't need the stress. I'll find something else to do. And Bobby Joe told me, he says, you know, Gary, I said, I'm here. It's still the place to go. It's still the dream to come true with. There are risks and there's responsibilities and accountabilities that goes with that job. But if you just, work hard at it, you'll find that it's worth every risk there is. So I said, okay. My goal now was to be the CEO of a squadron, and that first step at that time was to be the executive officer, because they were basically, if you were competent and doing okay, and your CO liked you and you worked well and he thought you can do the job, he would recommend to the next echelon that, hey, Gary should be that commanding officer. And
wasn't the executive officer a major, though?
It can be.
Okay.
It can be, but on the ship cruises, they have been lieutenant colonel, CO, and Lieutenant Colonel XO, executive officer. And when I became the CO, my executive officer was a lieutenant colonel as well. So it was a change in time of how they were doing things, because a lot of times the CEO came from outside the squadron, just showed up 3-4 weeks before they transitioned, and he was a lieutenant colonel at that point, got promoted just shortly before that. So things changed in how they did things over those years.
What unit did you get command of, and, well, tell me when it happened and more about the unit, too.
We cruised for 6 months, and we came back roughly in April time frame, and that CO was due to rotate in June, and so in June I was what they call fleet up, so I was lieutenant colonel, so I became the CO for HMM 161.
This is June of '89.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Trying to get my dates.
And HMM, medium helicopters.
Medium helicopters, which is 46s.
Okay. Well,
So-
you're back to your home turf then.
That's right. Well, I was there. Yeah, I was. So now I'm the CO, and the strange thing is that the new Air Group CO came from the East Coast, and he was his experiences on the East Coast was that they had a stay back squadron. Of all the squadrons they had one squadron who would do the VIP missions, the VIP missions, maybe some generic repelling missions down there, or they had some other things. And the idea was that the stay back squadron would do all that stuff, which would free up the other squadrons who was going to be deployed to do more training, not take away their flight time, let them do more training, get ready for their deployment and where they're going to go. And so that was a concept. Well, along with that that concept became, well, you're also lowest on the priority for people, on parts, aircraft, and flight time.
The one that's on the training mission is lowest?
The one at the stayback squadron.
Okay.
The stayback squadron was now, and that was how East Coast Air Group did it. And this guy, the colonel, came from the East Coast, and that's what he wanted to do at MAG 16, which was where I was Marine Air Group 16. So that was my mission. So as it worked out, I had a 12 aircraft, 4 was flyable because I didn't have any parts to keep the other ones flying. Out of 33 to 35 pilots, I had 10 to include me. And I became the functional check pilot and everything you could think of, because everybody had either flying or was sick, or I ended up flying almost every day. We did the same missions. We'd go 29 Palms for static displays and just fly out there and sit there for a day and then come back home. Those are the kind of missions we did. And so, but ironically, in this time frame, squadron tour, CO tour is 18 months. So roughly 7 months into this program, I get called on a Sunday morning by the group CO, and he said, "Gary, we got this Desert Shield program," and the squadron was assigned to Marine Air Group 70, and Marine Air Group 70 was assigned to the 7th MEB at 29 Palms, and the 7th MEB responsibility was the Middle East.
The Marine Expeditionary
Brigade,
okay.
MEB. And so the 7th MEB was responsible for actions in the Middle East. And that's how a West Coast squadron got attached to the Middle East. So the 7th MEB was activated, which activated MAG Marine Air Group 70. And my HMM 161, again, stayback squadron, was assigned to MAG 70 as part of this contingency.
Put some specific dates on this. August 2nd, 1990 is when Saddam Hussein, after the long war that they had with Iran, decided that Kuwait was there for the taking, and on August 2nd, Iraqi forces invaded and occupied Kuwait. And very quickly after that, of course, the world mobilized. President Bush mobilized, and it wasn't in just 5 days later, August 7th, that officially Operation Desert Shield began. So that probably was about the time frame you were just talking about.
Yes. In fact, August 13th, I was in Saudi Arabia. And how I got there is a whole nother story, because I get called in Sunday morning from the group CO. He says, this Desert Shield program and all that, says, you're going to be going. I says, but Skipper, I only got 4 airplanes. I only got 10 pilots. I didn't have any maintenance people. I didn't have any gunners. Didn't have barely any crew chiefs. A man 4, let alone 12. Didn't have 12 airplanes. He said, well, we'll give you the squadron next to you airplanes. And so I came back, and Wayne was a good friend of mine, but not very long. When I told him I was going to take your airplanes, and my maintenance guys that I had went down there this was now Monday, and my phone at home as well at work just would not stop ringing. I had volunteers from East Coast, from Hawaii to everywhere to get attached to the squadron, and I happened to have 2 pilots from Yuma who was helping me doing some academic training. And so I kept those 2 because they were my instructor base, my WTIs, if you want to call them. So, and they became, out of 10 pilots, they became the 2. So anyway, I end up in that week, we were in Saudi Arabia, all of us. I had 12 airplanes. I had 35 pilots. I had every maintenance personnel, gunner, more gunners than I thought I ever dreamed of, and crew chiefs to man all the airplanes. And so I had more than what they call a table organization for the squadron when I left. And we took the airplanes, the mechanics went over and checked them out, and the pilots signed the paperwork to accept them, flew them to El Toro, tore them all down and put them in 140 C5s, and off they went. They flew over to Saudi almost that same day, four aircraft per C5.
You're saying that by August 13th, the entire unit is in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah. I landed in Saudi Arabia the 13th of August.
And then you got to reassemble the aircraft, sounds like.
That's right. We did. To pull them all out, put it all back together, had to do a ground turn, make sure all functional, we didn't lose anything. And when we took with us GP tents, we didn't have enough cots for everybody. And I never saw a 9mm, but I got one issue with 50 rounds before I left, and we got into country. Jebel International Airport was a brand new airport, brand new international airport, never used by international planes to my knowledge. They had Saudis had some helicopters there as a part of their self-defense force, I guess, and they had a brand new terminal. And Mike Kurth, the CEO of the Huey Squadron in Camp Pendleton, arrived a few hours before I did. So he was really the first one to land, and I was basically the second one to land. And his squadron people occupied most of the terminal. So I told my sergeant major in the XO, I says, okay, it's just all desert. Everybody looked, just desert. Go find a place and pitch the tents.
I think we got a picture here of that you probably took yourself of Jebel International Airport.
International Airport. We landed and we said go out there in the dirt. So we went out there and we pitched about 12 GP tents, general purpose tents, and we occupied a little spot in the hangar there for our maintenance people or for equipment. And the offices was we grabbed a little corner of terminal portion within the terminal for the maintenance guys. Unfortunately, there was only about 4 restrooms, and they were quickly overran and plugged up within a weekend, because Mike had about 300 people and I had over 300 people total. And we put our tents down, and we got them all staked and set up, and then we had to remove them. I think we moved them 2 different times. Staked them all out, had to pick them all up and move them somewhere else. Picked them all up again and moved them somewhere else. And within about 3 weeks time period, based on other units coming in and how we were going to be situated. Was nobody in charge there? We just got there. There was nothing. There was nothing there other than that terminal, and I was the second unit to arrive. And there were C5s and C-141s landing right and left behind me all week long and forever until the war started.
But you're part of this MEB, the MEB?
But we never saw the MEB. And we never saw the Marine Air Group 70 either, because they're the ones that the air bosses And Mike and I would sit down and say, what are we doing? He says, I don't know. There was some Apaches there. So we commandeered Apaches for ourselves because they didn't have any Stinger. We didn't have any weapons, to my knowledge. I had 50 cal machine guns, but I didn't have any bullets for
You're talking about Apache helicopters?
Apache helicopters.
Army helicopters?
Army helicopters were there. There was 4 of them.
And you just mentioned Stinger. That's the weapon that shoots down the aircraft.
Yes.
Now, how did that factor into it?
Well, we didn't have any. The Cobra guys had. They had I can't remember the name of the weapon. It was a missile, but it had to be lasered designated. The Grunts had what they call mule, a ground level designation, but the Apache can be airborne and designate the target. Our airborne capability was OV-10s, but they were at a different base. And so we asked the Army to hang around longer to help us out until we found a capability, airborne capability, to support the weapons that the Cobras had.
Well, it sounds like a little bit of confusion, but also it was this time frame that the news media was portraying you guys over in the desert as essentially a speed bump. So how did it feel being a speed bump if the Iraqis decide to invade Saudi Arabia?
Well, we didn't get any news there, so what we probably didn't know probably didn't hurt us because we didn't hear the word speed bump until later, or much later in the game. And I remember Mike and I and other CO friends of mine started arriving with their squadrons. Became a survival. There was no water, there was no showers. What food we had was MREs we brought. And so those survival instincts of taking care of my 300 people, making sure they were taken care of with water and food and shelter was the game plan, the priorities that we had, as well as get our aircraft up and running. And then we started flying around to see where in the hell are we? What's around us? What threat do we have? So we set up a perimeter around the airfields. All the squadron guy has supported with people, so we had 2 or 3 machine gun nests that we were part of the team plan as far as our protection. And the threat was the Bedouin camel herders, I guess you call them. They were just in the wild out there, just going from, I guess, point A to point B, and they had weapons. And so we were fearful that they would come to the airfield, or we had to be careful of flying over them because they were shooting at us every so often.
Now, it had been a long time since the United States had been at war like this. Did it surprise you?
Yes and no. It was a matter of time. We had Grenada, which was a little skirmish down in that country in the
Panama.
mid-80s. And we had a few other little ones, but not a big war. And yes, the threat numbers were overwhelming. They had the 4th or 2nd largest air force in the world, Iraq. They had like the #1 in the grunts, tanks, and so forth. We were trying to get that equal to maybe 2-to-1 superiority over them. And so fortunately for us, that they didn't do anything for almost 6 months. That allowed us to build up, that allowed us to train in that environment. And so, yes, we were a speed bump, and the fear was gas, and as much as anything else.
You mean chemical
warfare, because we were pretty behind the state of art when it came to protection for that. Our aircraft wasn't sealed or anything, but we did get the British AR-5 gas mask. And so that was another training process. It's a wetsuit-like with a charcoal liner for a flight suit, underneath your flight suit. And you're talking about warm temperatures, and now you got a rubber hood to go over with a plastic lens. And you had a pump that you carried with you, which gave you overpressure, as they call it, so it forced air inside your head and hood, and it would leak out, but that kept the gas from coming in. And you had your flight suit over that, and you had night vision goggles and helmet. All that was part of now I got to learn how to fly, shoot, and train with this AR-5.
I would think that vision would be a problem just because you're sweating so much inside that mask.
Well, if the pump is working okay, at least it wasn't sweating too bad. And once you got in the aircraft, supposedly you could hook it up to the electrical system, which gave you the power versus the battery we carried. And so we got there, and we end up, we were at Jebel for a long enough time to where the MEB, the Air Group 16, finally came on board. We eventually had, I don't know, probably 10 squadrons there alone, helicopter squadrons. And then the East Coast squadron started coming on board, and they ended up going out there north of where we were at, not too close to the border, and they built a whole new airfield out of the desert called Lonesome Dove. And you're talking about the same thing we had, they now had at nowhere, with tents and capabilities and mess halls and showers, you name it, out there nowhere. We end up leaving the Jebel, went to a place called Tanajib, which was a small...
Tanajib?
That's how I pronounced it.
T-E-N-T?
Tanajib, T-A-N-G,
oh, okay.
I think. It was north of Manifa, another air base in that area. And we were moved up there, and it was another place. It was a plan to get closer to the border. The air war was going to be picking up, if not already started by that time. And we were looking at the ground war G-Day coming around the corner. We were trying to get situated logistically and physically for the potential of breaching the borders and going north.
What did Susan think of you finally going into harm's way?
Well, it's funny because Sunday when I got called, she was in Yuma with her girlfriends, and we had plans to meet in San Diego. And I called her up and said, I don't think we're going to be able to meet in San Diego. You might want to come home. Because not only when I had what I was doing, but she, being the commanding officer's wife, kind of ran the wives club, if you want to call it, for the squadron. So I not only had the troops and the aircraft to take care of, her and I kind of looked at doing, get all the troops in the auditorium. We're looking at 3-4 days to coordinate. The chaplain came in, the legal guys came in with wills and so forth, and powers of attorneys, and communication system plan, what we had planned to set up, and all that. And when I left, there was no communication between Susie and I, except for when I got over there, we eventually able to communicate. Probably after the first month, I get one phone call a month, one phone call a week, and I had about 5 minutes to talk. It was like one of those things, how, you know, I love you, baby, and then we start saying, okay, I got Joe and Jim, and you know, these guys, they need to check on the wives, and she had a list on the same way on her side, so it became interacting, you know, problem issues or concerns to take care of on both ends.
Tell me exactly, as best you can, describe the mission that your unit had.
Well, our aircraft mission didn't change. Our aircraft mission is troop transport, and the other alternate missions was medical evacuation and logistics supply, resupply. And in a mechanized war, which is what we were in, there wasn't a whole lot of requirement for a troop movement. Though we did move a lot of troops from point A to point B within the ground floors of Saudi Arabia, getting them situated and all that. We had
in other words, you were keeping busy.
Yes.
As the buildup was occurring.
Yes. We also got built up, and we also developed the medevac plan, because we're looking at, I think, 1%, 10%. We're looking at over 20,000 casualties, potentially a lot of gas type, chemical attacks type. And so now we're looking at, we had a USS Comfort, a hospital ship in the Jebel port area. We had a major hospital in the port of Jebel. But in between Jebel and the border, where do you go? We're looking at a good hour, an hour and a half to get to the border. And so they had developed some intermediate medical sites based on the capability to a triage up by the border. And so the game plan that we developed for the theater, at least the Marine Corps side, was that we had, if the casualty happened at the border, we had helicopters at the border and medical evacuation capability, and we were going to pick them up, triage them right there, and haul them back to the next level, sustain them life better, then move them back to the hospital and eventually to the hospital ship. So we had this network of transportation capabilities. We also had a network of medical capabilities at different stages. When the G-Day, the ground war started, I and another aircraft was at the border, about a quarter mile from the border. We flew there around 05 in the morning with my AR-5 gas mask on, with my night vision goggles. We land out there in the desert, and we walk in there. Everybody else was in these gas masks. The ground war was going to kick off, and we sat there, my little battery-operated blower, keeping my head cool the best I can, and sat there. I think it was like 10 o'clock in the morning, and nothing was going on. Didn't get a call, didn't see anything. About 11, we had some casualties come in. By this time, the ground war had gone so fast that they didn't have time to drive 50 miles back to give me a casualty. We started getting calls to go pick up the casualties that occurred.
In Kuwait?
In Kuwait. So the breach was a piece of cake from what they say. They had a two plan and it went as planned, and they just rolled across with their tanks and nothing stopped them. And so now I'm sitting here, kind of an obsolete, concept, because we weren't expecting it to go that fast. And so I finally says, I'm not wearing this gas mask anymore. We took it off about 11 o'clock, and so we all took it off, and there wasn't any gas or chemical attacks. What chemical injuries was from the gas that was released in the breach. When they blew up those areas, there were some mines that had some gas in them, and that was what some of the grunts got caught with. So now I had a couple Iraqis who were injured, and I had a couple Marines who was injured. And I actually had to put them in two different aircraft because I was afraid the Marines would get out of their racks and kill the other Iraqis, or the Marines get out of their racks, because they were injured and so forth. And so anyway, we ended up flying back to the second stage, and actually flew the Iraqis back to the Jebel port. And basically my mission was over with at that time because the grunts were so far inland. So now I came back to the squadron, Tanajib, but the base that we were kind of getting missions from was Lonesome Dove. They had a fueling as well, so we would go back to refuel and then call the command up and find out where our next step is. So a lot of us came back to Tanajib to get the squadron airplanes fixed and refueled, rechecked, and rearmed, and go in and I check with my air group boss, Colonel Garrett, and see what the plan is, how it's going, what's going on next. And it was kind of a piecemeal what the war was doing. All I knew was that they were just moving really fast, and we were flying out of Lonesome Dove to stage. I had medevac guys sitting there. I had medevac guys staged some other place, and then we were getting missions to go into Kuwait to pick up some grunts and move them around a little bit. And not a whole lot, not a unit like it was a recon element to go someplace and drop them. So we ended up, I came back to the Tanajib, and we ended up getting a mission to go out to Lonesome Dove, and I was going to relieve a Huey squadron who happened, a Huey det. It was two Hueys that was assigned to General Myatt, who was the first battalion commander, division commander.
For the Marine Division?
For Marine Division. He was already about 25 to 30 miles north of the border. And so I flew up there, and this is before, right at the time frame when all the oil wells got let off. And so no more did I get there. The Huey guys had a system on their aircraft that I didn't have, called a loud hailer, a big speaking system, speakerphone. And so, which wasn't on my requirement. So when I go in to check in with the division and I talk to the Huey guys, they said, you have to have a loud hailer for the mission you're going to be doing. I said, well, I don't have one. Guess what, Huey, you're staying with me. So I commandeered the other two Huey guys, which I knew already from my Yuma guys days. So they stayed with me. And so now I had two Hueys and two 46s. They also had forward firing guns, so they were my gunship escorts as well for any kind of medevac. Well, by this time, the freaking smoke was everywhere, just covered us. And overnight, nothing was going on. A few things were happening. That morning we got called for a medevac. Mike Kurt, my Huey CO friend, called for a medevac. He was up there about 20 miles in front of us. And so I get out there and we're walking around and I can't see the ground. It's 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm putting night vision goggles on, can't see.
I think we've got a shot that you took while you were there of the oil fields burning, if we can get that up as well. And obviously you just mentioned you were on the ground for some of this.
Yes. So on the ground where this stuff was all over us and we couldn't see, it was like 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, and we had a map that was just littered with power lines. They were everywhere. And so all that smoke was blowing in the direction that we were. So it got up and then it went over and it just kind of settled to where we were having to be at. And we were there before it came to us. And when we woke up in the morning or that night, it was all like it was one big cloud of smoke and you couldn't see anything. Could hardly breathe. We had bad scarf around our mouth a little bit to keep some of that bad stuff out of it. And so I've got night vision goggles and I'm walking. I can barely see the ground. And I get in this aircraft and I'm thinking, this is stupid. I can't see where I'm going. I got night vision goggles. I got 4 aircraft and my map just shows power lines from the 200 foot down to 10 feet. So we take off. I thought, well, maybe it'll get better. And we took off and I no more got 300 yards and I says, this is stupid. I can't see where I'm going. I'm on the instruments at 50 feet. So I told the crew, I said, we're going to make one big left turn and you follow me back. We're going to land back because we can't see where we're going to go. And I called Mike and said, Mike, I can't make it. I can't see. Now, the other side of the coin, how did Mike get up there? Well, Mike, before he had the issue, General Myatt he's the one that's caught and trapped up there 25 miles in front of us. Now, he's a general, and he's up there with the forward element, and he gets surrounded. He's got tanks shooting at him everywhere around. He's got 2 Humvees and I think a Jeep or something, and he is caught. Mike happens to have an OV-10 area observer guy who knew how to work the FLIR, forward-looking infrared system. And they had put that on the Huey as an experiment down the road, and Mike had it on his aircraft. So he commandeers an OV-10 AO to work the FLIR. Mike had night vision goggles to look at. In between the FLIR, who could see the wires and poles, and him, he flew up to see where the General Myatt was in the area, came back and had his Cobra guys, loaded and armed, follow him in close trace up to that area. And when they got over the area, according to General Myatt, the Cobras were over his vehicle, just firing rockets, 360 all the way around them. Expend all their ordnance, Mike hauls them back, gets another group of Cobras, follow him in there, and he did that for almost an hour. And so Mike let him in and out, and in that time frame when they called for me, and I couldn't see anything, I didn't have the FLIR, and I wasn't going to take a chance, and I couldn't fly high, because if I fly too high, now I could be I didn't have the right, what they call IFF codes, identified friend or foe, and if you didn't have the right IFF codes, then you could be a bandit and potentially be shot down. And so all that led to say, I'm staying on the ground, I can't see where I'm going, I don't want to be shot down. I didn't have the fuel to be circling around there and all that good stuff to start with. So I came back, my 42, 46s and the 2 Hueys, we sat there and for about another 2 hours. Finally, it got a little bit better. And they were still kind of calling for a medevac. I said, oh shit. So I started talking to the Huey guys and started looking at the threat and look at the smoke. I said, we might be able to go into Kuwait, which is where no Marines were at and no friendlies were at, to my knowledge. We're going to go that. That's why we didn't go the first time, because they were all bad guys, because we just did a amphibious feint in that area that supposedly tied in a lot of Iraqis to hold them looking that way while we came up the backside.
Looking out towards the ocean.
Yes, sir. And so it was a feint. But none of the guys aboard ship knew that really until I found out later on. They didn't know. They were planning for the real thing. But anyway, so we didn't go that way initially for the medevac flight to get around the smoke, because that was bad man land right now, and I didn't want to take a chance being out there, afraid, unarmed type of thing. So eventually we said, well, we got to get up there. And so I had the 2 Hueys, and I might have a picture of that one as well. We were flying up there as and I had my Huey out to one side. He was my escort, and we flew around that area. We got up to the coordinates they gave us for the medevac, and they were already gone. By this time, they have already got rid of all the bad guys, the Cobras did, and General Myatt and all those guys left to go up to Kuwait International Airport. So when I got to the medevac site and I started talking, they said they're already at the airport. So I flew in the airport, and I was probably the first 40 helicopters that landed there. 2 46s, 2 Hueys landed there, walked up, and here's General Myatt with his battalion behind him, all the battalion he had. And they had a big array of weapons that they had found and captured and taken en route. And then I'm sitting there talking to General Myatt, and then General Boomer walks up, the 3-star. He's in charge of the whole Marine unit there and this whole theater. So General Boomer, I was talking with him a little bit, and so I congratulated both of those guys for the mission we accomplished. And so now we're sitting there. So now what are we going to do? Our mission was done. The grunts are already at the airport. The airport was somewhat secured. And so we walked around, and the 5th Marines were down a little further, and they had already occupied some buildings. We walked out, and we had ZPU-4s, which are 4-barrel anti-aircraft weapons with a radar-guided, very deadly weapon.
Soviet system.
Soviets. And they're all out there, 3 or 4 of them. All got weapons, bullets in the chambers, all operational. And the people just left. And there was, there was a lot of charred buildings all torn up from our bombing efforts to set the stage for us to get where we got. So, we moved from the border right to that Kuwait probably in a day and a half. It was just real fast operations. So now I'm sitting there, and I didn't have enough fuel to go flying around too much other than like a one-way trip, straight shot back to Lonesome Dove to get fuel. And they couldn't go straight back because of all the smoke and the wires and so forth, and I didn't want to fly high and set myself up. So I stayed there, and unfortunately a thunderstorm came in, so now I'm there for 3 days and still stuck there. The Hueys, when they finally cleared up, they had the fuel, so they went home, and sitting there, and all of a sudden I see 8 46s land on the opposite end of the airfield. And they come air taxiing and taxiing up to where we were at, and they shut down. And it was a reserve unit. And I'm thinking, what are they doing here? So they end up, did a troop movement, landed some battalions somewhere in the field, and they came up to here to get fuel. Well, there was no fuel there, and they were like me, they were stuck. And so I had enough fuel eventually to, when the smoke cleared a little bit, to go straight back, and we did. They ended up having fuel trucks come fill them up. So they're there for 2 more days. And so meanwhile, the battalion guys left. When I was there, when I got back to Tana Jeep a little bit and got refueled, now I'm doing VIP missions, VIP missions to go up and show them. Well, that time frame is when they had that, I don't know what you call it, the bombing of the road going out of Kuwait. They cut them all up. That was going on at that time. And so when I get back, the VIPs want to go up and see what was happening, all that stuff. So now I started flying missions up there to show and tell and sightsee and all that.
But you're still flying through all the burning oil wells, aren't you?
Not as much. Somehow the weather had caused that to dissipate more. I can fly up there without having to fly into them. You can still see them burning, but nothing like you saw in the picture there. It wasn't that thick. It wasn't that intense. It was there, but I could still fly 25, 50 feet, and I could see. And so the ground war didn't last very long, as we know it now. And so I get all my airplanes back. Now, my squadron, in my absence, had a mission. And they were assigned, it was a daytime mission, a troop lift. There was 4 46s from my squadron, and for about 3 other squadrons, 53s, Hueys, Cobras, 100+ helicopters out in the desert floor at about 9 o'clock in the morning, waiting for the word to go. And the mission was to pick up this battalion unit, reinforce, and take them to a point in the desert, kind of a stopping point while the Marines made the turn to the left. This was a block, whatever was going to come down from that side. Well, it didn't go on time, and it didn't go at all during daylight. And so now it became dark. And Larry Bynack, a good friend of mine as well as my safety officer, was telling me the story that the airplanes were scattered a mile apart from one end to the other, just in between there. And there was no communication, there was no vehicles to get you around. So the guys at one end had to walk to the middle, and they all kind of walked in, and they kind of hung out there for a while to figure out what we're going to do, when are we going to go. And so eventually it became night vision goggle mission, and that was being dark. And they were still on the tap for this troop movement. And so they end up 8, 9 o'clock, thereabouts. They get told to make the mission go. And it was one of these quick things, take off now. Well, the guys are all in the middle here talking. Now they all got to run about a half a mile apiece to those airplanes, brief their crews, and then get taken off. Take off. And so Colonel Larry said, we get back, we just ran to our aircraft, put on our night vision goggles, and there was no rhyme or reason for the takeoff sequence. So airplanes were taking off, and my Dash 2 in my flight of 4 was a flight of 4, a flight of 4, a flight of 4. They were all over the place, a mile apart. Took off, and of course we had one big humongous footprint for dust, like moon dust almost. And so Mitch, who was Dash 2, my operations officer, the lead picked up, and he was waiting for the guy in front of him to take up, and then Mitch picked up and started going forward, and of course now it's IFR. They couldn't see anything. And Mitch hits the ground and rolls over. So potentially a crash. As it worked out, it wasn't an accident, it was an incident. We salvaged the airplane and brought them all back.
Is that the one that we got a picture of the aircraft that's obviously pretty well damaged? Yep.
Yeah. So it crashed, it rolled over. All the crew members were okay, as I found out. I get a call from my group CO about 11 o'clock, says that you got one crashed 46. And I said, where's my crew? So we don't know. Are they okay? Don't know. So I spent half the night calling all the medical sites in the area I knew of, and no one had heard or seen my guys. So the next morning I got the maintenance officers, give me the best airplane you got, so I'm going to go fly them, we'll go find them, my people. So I go first to the crash site, and the plane's rolled over on the side. And I flew over and circled it a couple times, and all of a sudden the people started walking out of the aircraft. So I landed the aircraft, and my crew members were all inside the aircraft. And then no one, the mission, they all picked off and left. There was nothing left behind other than the aircraft and those guys. And they weren't going to be just wandering through the desert. They stayed by the aircraft. So I picked them up, took them to Lonesome Dove.
They were happy to see you.
That's right. And at first I was hoping they weren't there, but at the same time I'm glad they were there, because the nearest site was miles and miles away, and they would never have found it because they didn't have it on the map. So I picked them up, took them to Lonesome Dove, did all the administrative things as far as get them all checked out, and they were all okay. And the aircraft the grunts had took the old Jeeps, World War II type Jeeps as I call it. There's probably a 155 or something like that name for them. But the grunts had modified these Jeeps with Stinger missiles on them. And so they end up ripping the back of the ramp down, and they pulled this Jeep sideways out of the aircraft, got all the ordnance out of there, and they got the Jeep and they just drove off. And so that was what the grunts needed, and they wanted that weapon. So anyway, but the aircraft was picked up after the war, or shortly after that. 53 Echo, my neighbor Bob picked it up, and of course he teases me how he had to go and pick up my aircraft out of the desert floor with a sling. And they carried it back to Jebel, and we flew it back to the States, and they supposedly fixed it up, and so it was an incident versus an accident. So the squadron didn't get hit for an accident. The air group didn't get hit for another accident, which they had numerous accidents during this training evolution and in the air war. Mike had a bad accident where it killed everybody. It was a thunderstorm event, and they had a, quote, mission that they had to do. It was to pick up some maps and so forth. But anyway, so we've had a lot of accidents and some casualties on the helicopter side. We crashed like 3 helicopters in training alone.
Well, before I get the unit out of the Middle East, I wanted to ask you a few more questions, and most of this would have been things that happened before the war kicked off. And the air war kicked off. January 17th, and then a month later, February 24th, before the ground war kicked off, and it was all done by the 28th.
Yeah.
So it went blazingly
So
fast
fast.
once the ground war started. But you have quite a few months that you were there, and looking at the pictures of the Jubail International Airport, there's not much there. So what do your troops do during ground time?
It was kind of a commander's paradise, if you want to call it, because there was no R&R, there was no drinking, there was no women, and so most of my people were scrounging around and finding the coffee out of MREs and overdosing on coffee, if you want to call it that. And we end up, the wives club, Susie and the ladies back home, really kept the morale going, because my wife had done a lot of fundraising items, events. They bought VCRs, they even bought us a small TV, they bought us a Christmas tree, they got books, they got videos and so forth. Sent it all over to it. They had tablets made and other things made for us. And Christmas came around and they all sent us gifts and so forth. And we had a couple of Santa Clauses in the unit, went around and placed little items, different people's hooches and so forth in bed. And so they kept the morale going. They, as I talked to her after the fact, was probably more stressed out for what she was doing, because people problems don't go away whether you're home or whether you're deployed. And people problems just kind of become bigger problems when the husband's gone. And it never fails. Every time I deploy, it seems like that next day the hot water heater blows, the washing machine didn't work, or something goes wrong at the house that causes a major catastrophe. And nothing different here. And when we all left town, seemed like every wife was calling Susie up and what's going on. And Susie became real good friends with the chaplain of the base. So her and the chaplain became good friends. And every time she had an issue with the wife or to help take care of the issue, she would get the chaplain, and the chaplain her would go visit the people and so forth. Now, we go way back before I got to the squadron initially as an XO, when they deployed, before I got there was tents pitched in front of the CO's house, because they want to know right then because they figure the CO knows everything, the CO's wife knows everything, will hear things first. And they want to be right there when things came in. So they were pitching tents in their front yard. That's how bad. And I told Susie, no way we're going to have that. So, but she did know as much as I knew. As when I heard it, I was able to get a hold of her. And she was getting some information from the air group that was left in the rear, as well as the chaplain for what his communications was let her know. And so, but they didn't really know how we were doing. They would hear stories on the news. So do we, and we would think, holy crap, where'd this happen at, and we would find out that it happened up north and all that, and but yeah, we played cards every night. We were always flying day and night because of maintenance, training requirements. We had no GPS systems in the aircraft. Our standard navigation is a TACAN, tactical navigation system, and an ADF, an automatic direction finder. That's what we have, which does no good in Saudi Arabia or Kuwait, because those units, those navigation sites on the ground don't exist. So when we first got there, for almost 6 months, we had a big map of Saudi.
But there aren't a whole lot of terrain features to be looking for.
Well, and you're right. And so what we would do is throw a dart on the map and say, okay, our training mission tonight is to navigate to that point. So you had coordinates, you had a distance, and you had a heading. And back in the old days, it was a time distance check, because they're right. You get airborne and it's just flat. There are no obstacles to look at to keep you left, right, north of the course. And so what you had to do was maintain airspeed and maintain heading the best you can. And hopefully you get in the right area to where you can see somebody in the ground that might get you to that ground. But that was how we trained. And we did that day and night, night vision goggles. Try to land in that stuff was challenging because it was like moon dust, so you had to be careful where you landed, thinking that you try to minimize the moon dust signature. So your technique for landing had to be just right. Closer to the ground. Wasn't always perfect, but we didn't crash any airplanes in that regard. But that's what we did. We trained during the daytime, we trained at night. and try to keep the cycle going and trying to keep all the pilots up to speed and currents, because we didn't know what, when, or where was going to happen next. From a medical standpoint for flying, and we had night drills with the perimeter. My sergeant major at the time, he had a heart attack while we were there. And I had a flight surgeon. It's funny because we called him Grasshopper, the old kung fu show Grasshopper in those days. Well, he shaved his head bald. And well, he got nicknamed the Grasshopper, and it just kind of stuck. So he was playing, the Grasshopper was playing cards with the sergeant major and some of the other guys, and the sergeant major kind of keeled over there. So we took him, they ended up taking him to the hospital that day, that night, and he was okay, but he was kind of done for the war, and he went home. The military had a one R&R site. It was a camp number. And a lot of these camps over there had the normal camp workers from Saudi Arabia for working the oil wells and the refineries. They would be like a city within a confined perimeter and so forth. We had invites to go to one camp, for example, and they came out and said, hey, Colonel, you can take 4 guys or 5 guys. This place over here, and they'll come pick you up. They got a steak and lobster night for you guys. And so we go there within a security gated community. You go inside and there's condos or apartments like. And we met the Americans who was there, and they were working on like a yearly basis. They get a couple days every year to go home. But they went down to Riyadh and bought some steaks and lobsters and came up, and they served us dinner. And there was no alcohol in Saudi, so they even had a still down the basement. They were making their own whiskey and so forth.
Were there any prohibitions that the Saudi government was putting on for religious services?
We did not see that. We did not have that problem in our base compounds, and that's as far as our perimeter went. Only in the newspaper did I read outside the compounds that they had issues. You know, women couldn't drive, they had to keep their faces, but nothing on the religious side. Our base was sitting next to a mosque. The only thing we didn't like was that mosque was going off, every 4 hours, all 24 hours a day, every 4 hours sounding it off, and how they were doing their yelling and preaching on the speakers.
The prayers.
And so that was going every 4 hours, all night long, all day long, just all the time. But there was no restriction on us in our compound for religious, and we had a kind of a generic, if you want to call it, church service. They did bring in certain specialties. The Jewish had their own church, and of course the Catholics had their own. Then you had kind of the Protestant type approach, but there was no restrictions of what we could do or not do. And so we didn't see any of that in that 6 months, 7 months we were there in that regard. Again, we were restricted from going in town. Though I did go in town I had my troops, early on the aircraft was painted in a picture of a tan in color. We went there green. And we did some experiments back in the 80s about household latex paint. The concept was aboard ship, we would be able to change colors of our aircraft based on the terrain we'd be going into, based on the country we're going to be fighting or need to do some flying in. So instead of being a green olive drab aircraft, we can paint it whatever we want to paint. We had all the combinations of paint aboard ship. That was the concept. Well, we painted one in the squadron back in the States, waited maybe a week or two, flew it several times, and then we figured just wash it off. Well, it didn't wash off so well, so we had a pink aircraft in the squadron, and it wouldn't come off. And so, anyway, Mike, when he got there in Saudi, he had brought with him polyurethane paint, which is the correct paint type to paint the aircraft with. Well, I didn't have time for all that. Obviously, I had less than a week, and I was gone with another squadron's aircraft. So I sent a few people in town with some money, go find all the latex paints you can get, and we'll just come back and paint them. So we had 3 types of camouflage colors. We would paint them all up. Now, the aircraft already had a pattern to it, green, white, green, gray, and black. We just changed those patterns to tan, light tan, and darker tan. We would paint one aircraft, let it dry, and we had a low altitude air defense system, guys. several miles away. So we would coordinate with them, say, okay, we're going to come out there and see what you think about our paint scheme. And they would come out, they would take a look at it, says, that's not so good. So we go back and we change the color. We go out there another day or two later and says, how about this one? Didn't see it at all. Didn't see it at all. That was great. So I came back and I told him at that time, General Moore was the wing commander. He happened to be walking up early the 2 weeks we were there. And Mike Kurth and I was sitting there, and Mike says he's going to be painting his aircraft with this paint. And he says, good. I says, well, sir, I'm going to paint mine too. I've already got a pattern we're going to use. What kind of paint you going to use? I said, well, we got some latex paint. And he says, well, that's corrosive. I said, well, after this war, I really don't care. Well, I'm going to paint it. We'll get through the war. Later, we'll worry about that later on. He said, okay. So we got the paint. We ended up painting all the aircraft. So Mike had all his paint at one style. His was a light tan, all one color. So I had a pattern, so I painted mine in a certain pattern, light tan color combinations. And then, so then the air group came aboard. Colonel Garrett and a bunch of other squadron guys came over. And so somewhere in that time frame of the 6 months, there was concern from the other guys who didn't paint theirs that they didn't want to paint theirs, or did want to paint but didn't want to paint them the way I painted, wanted to paint them the way but Mike had to paint. So anyway, Colonel Garrett gave out an executive order saying you will paint your aircraft one of two types, either like mine or like Spot, and you will paint it with latex paint. So we did that, and so eventually when they all got back to the States, they all had to go to San Diego to the depot level, higher level maintenance. They were all sandblasted off, and then they had to repaint everything. So, but anyway, the time frame didn't care. We got the war to get through. Let's get through the war first, sir, and we'll worry about all the corrosion and problems later on. But anyway, but we painted the aircraft. So that took some time. And again, just that time killing was the issue. And my admin guys, how much can you do in the admin side of the house? Well, we had to keep track of records. Then there was anthrax shots, and then there was medical, and people were getting sick, and then people were looking around. We got the sand vipers that was running around in the sand that was scaring people a little bit, so we were concerned about that. Then we had the scorpions. Of course, maintenance guys were catching the scorpions, putting them in a little resin box and putting resin all over them, and we had some big black ones about 4.5 inches long, big type scorpion everywhere. So we had different things to keep them busy. If it wasn't work, they'll find something to do. That's right. Then somewhere in that first 3 months, it started getting a mess hall. And they had fresh vegetables. I'll never forget it. We were happy to get it because we've been eating MREs, three MREs a day. And we had water buffalo, which is a big container that they would put water in. And you go there with a spigot and you fill your canteen up. Well,
with nice warm water, I would guess.
That's right. And so then they had what General Gray, the Commandant Marine Corps, he came over to visit. We had bottled waters, and he calls them designer bottled waters. And so he didn't like the idea we were using that for our water. He wanted the buffaloes, so we didn't have that many buffaloes, but we quickly had a whole bunch of buffaloes after he saw the water bottles. It was not tactical, and it wasn't camo, and it wasn't expedition.
The water buffaloes, essentially water trailers, right?
Yes, yes. So we got the mess hall, and shortly after we started eating the vegetables, we all got dysentery. My whole squadron was down. I went from ready to go fight my squadron to I got no pilots. We were all freaking sick. The whole squadron was sick. And so it took us a week and a half to get through that whole process.
Was the food contaminated, or was just you guys weren't used to eating fresh vegetables?
Probably the first more than the last. We were told that the veggies came from Pakistan, and the Pakistanians' fertilizer was not the type that we would use, and they weren't clean, processed properly, and so was what we were told after the fact. And so after the fact, I got people who would not go at that mess hall for anything other than coffee, so they were still eating MREs 3 a day or 2 a day the whole time.
Well, why should your combat experience be any different from any soldier for the last 4,000 years, you know?
That's right. That's right. So
dysentery has come under lots of different names over the eons.
Yeah. But anyway, so that was our experience with the mess hall. It eventually got to be a thriving mess hall because now I sat there one time at the mess hall and talk about people coming in. A lot of my military fellow pilots had gotten out of the Marine Corps. And I'm sitting there and having a cup of coffee in the morning, and then I see 5 or 6 guys I knew from before. And I says, "What are you guys doing here?" He said, "We're flying Hueys. We're a reserve unit." So that's the first war where we really had started the total force concept of bringing everybody. I know that I think 80%, maybe 85% of the Marine Corps was there in the country somewhere, somehow. The only people that didn't bring it to the war was students were still in school, they had to stay. I think headquarters Marine Corps people were still assigned their jobs. Short of that, almost every other Marine Corps pilot of some sort somehow was in the country. And on top of that, we had visits from a lot of dignitaries. I think I had a picture of General McCorkle, who was Deputy Chief of Staff of Aviation. He was there for a short time. Bands showed up there just to entertain the guys at the terminal. General Gray, the Commandant of Marine Corps, came over there and he got in trouble by making some derogatory remarks against the Army, and then I think General Schwarzkopf threw him out of the country.
Well, good for him.
That's right. He got thrown out of the country. Of course, the Commandant doesn't have any operational control of anybody. And he can bark aloud, but he can't do anything. And so Schwarzkopf threw him out of the country because he was making remarks about the Army being too slow and all that.
Wanted to ask you, you'd spent a lot of the time in the 1980s focused on training, operational development of tactics, working on the doctrine, those kinds of things. And beyond the specific role that your unit had, would you say that the Marine Corps and that the military, American military in general, was preparing for the right war?
Yes and no. You know, we train, a lot of our training is done in a desert environment. Different kind of desert, I'll have to admit, but still a desert environment. We always figured that the Vietnam type of war was going to be behind us. And we always feared a Middle East war, which would be more of a mechanized war. And so we were talking a lot about our capabilities and our tactics was against the tanks. Well, you're not going to find tanks in the jungle environment too much like you would in the desert. So I think our focus was in the right direction. In fact, a real quick story was that when I got there, after my group CO came in, Colonel Garrett, who now became the head guy over all the squadrons there, he says, "Gary, I want you to be the mission commander for the air group." I says, "Sir, I really prefer to fight in my own squadron based on the mission I've been assigned and lead my squadron. That's what every SEAL wants to do. I don't want to be yanked up and do something else." He says, "No, I want you to be the mission planner, the weapons and tactics guy for the air group." "Yes, sir," 3 bags full. What it came down to is I planned 2 major evolutions, occupying probably 300 airplanes, fixed wings and to boot, and I rode into Huey as a mission commander. We had one mission was taking down an airfield in Kuwait. And we took that mission and made it horizontal with time, distance, the whole work with fast movers and so forth, and we planned that all out. And we executed on desert floor based on what we saw as a threat and the aircraft and coordination, communications, everything, and how we're going to land. The landing and takeoff's the worst. We're looking at one casualty all our aircraft issues were landing or taking off on that desert floor, just can't see. It's moon dust. It's like powder, talcum powder. Once you picked it up, you just couldn't get rid of it, and there was hardly any wind most of the time, so it didn't go away real fast. And so we worked out techniques of making that work. And I did 2 missions for the air group at that point, occupying every squadron. They all contributed assets. Time the war came, I didn't do that. I did something else. I fought my own squadron. But anyway, I did that. But going back to what we were training, now just different type of environment. Our tactics, our training from previous coordination within the squadrons, all married together real well. I had weapons and tactics guys from every squadron who was involved in missions. And because of that, our training was all about the same. We all had the same, so it wasn't a big communication change, this is all new. No, they all knew the tactics. It's just a matter of how we're going to make it work for this particular mission, this particular day, and this particular night. And so the desert floor became the threat. The desert floor caused us all kinds of maintenance problems. It was fine dust. And our leading blades on the aircraft are titanium. And after flying, and our turbine blades in the turbine engines are titanium. But that fine dust just chewed them up like sawdust. Was nothing. I mean, it just tore them all to pieces. And I got out one day and looked at my blades, and you think I got a hammer and I just beat the crap out of each blade. You think, how could that happen? Well, it was caused by that dust. And so we quickly went from 12 airplanes to 5 airplanes real fast. All the blades were all torn up, and we had no more blades. So all the 46s back in States was stripped down, and the engines and the blades were all being shipped over to us for replacements. When we got them, we had to figure out what we're going to do to change, because we can't keep doing the same thing. Air war hadn't even started yet. And so we had to now make our aircraft last through this war. Well, we found out an old corrective action that the Israelis did. They have the same dust as used polyurethane tape, cleared tape over the leading edge of the blades. Not much to do with the engine blades inside, but the blades they could. In fact, I saw some British pilots flew a airliner with a Sheik aboard their aircraft, and I walked up and looked at the aircraft, and even their wings were covered with polyurethane tape for the same reason. So it's an old technique, but the sand that we have in 29 Palms and Yuma is a different kind of sand that they had in deserts in Saudi Arabia or Kuwait. And so now our training went from Cobras and Hueys to 25 to 30 feet to 200 feet, because there's a layer like smog you see on the West Coast. You get above that and it's clear. Below that you got this haze, but you don't know it really until you get out of it. And so we flew higher all the time, except for takeoff and landings, to stay out of it as much as we could, and we survived.
Well, what I want to do here for the last few minutes is get you home and then quickly cover the rest of your military career, if we could. And you're still in command. How soon after the war ends on the 28th do you come home? Does the unit come home?
I was home in late March, middle March, late March time frame. My change of command was in June. And another big carrot, when I got home, we had a hero's welcome. We got the Jebel. I had a few people who stuck by the aircraft, but 90% of my troops were on a 747 flying back to the States. So we landed in El Toro.
With stewardesses and the whole thing,
yes, huh? Yes, it was nice. So we landed in El Toro about 9 o'clock at night in somewhat of a rain, and the place was covered with people, families and friends and so forth. We had fire trucks. So it was a hero's welcome. It was really nice. And so about another 4 days later, the rest of the squadron came back. The maintenance people, the aircraft all came back, and now we had to unload all those aircraft and get them back to Tustin. That was in March, early April, I think. And then in June, I was changed of command. And I went to Maxwell Air Force Base, to the Air War College, Air University the Air Force had. Now I'm a lieutenant colonel, and this school had 4 Marines. And I was a senior Marine of this 4. And the colonel there says, "Gary, you got one mission at this school. I don't care about the academics. We got a Marine Corps birthday coming up in November, and it's the biggest event in town. That's your job. Everything else I don't care about. I don't care if you fail." And so I was there for a year. And after that, I went to Quantico. And General Boomer now, who was the senior Marine in theater, came back. And his concern was that in country, he had a MEF, Marine Expeditionary Force, which is the largest task organized element we have. Well, when you sit there and you're going to fight a MEF, the Marine training is from the battalion level. And the battalion says he'd come up 3 courses of actions, left, right, and the middle, supported by air and logistics. When you're at the MEF level, you can't fight that way. You're no longer a battalion. You're a MEF. You have all kinds of forces capability. Well, General Boomer had 1,000 people, his staff, and nobody knew how to fight a meth level war, which is what this was. And so I was assigned to the General Boomer's concept of staff, MAGTAF staff training program. And I was the head pilot there. I had a fixed wing, I had command and control guys. Anyway, we came up teaching the meth how to fight at that level, teaching generals how to fight, which was not an easy process because at that level they already think they know everything. And anyway, and they probably do, but the concept was that at the MEF level, the infantry may not be a course of action at all. It may all be logistically supported in putting things in place. It may be an air war, which is what it was. So anyway, so at that level, I was there for 3 years, picked up battalion command. I had the largest battalion in the Marine Corps, 3,000 plus Marines, and it worked out. I just walked across the street, and that was my new headquarters. First aviation guy to be in charge of this battalion, so they didn't know what they were getting. The general I worked for, his first aviator to work with, and he was lucky because Ciparoni had the security battalion, another 53 pilots, so he had 2 aviators, so he thought he was doomed. But anyway, we survived 2 years, and that did well. And then I got picked up Naval ROTC program. I was the CO of that. Naval ROTC at Virginia Military Institute, VMI in Lexington, Virginia. And I retired there.
Naval ROTC at VMI, and most of the graduates go into the Army, do they not?
Pretty close. The VMI has a really, it's known for the engineering program. And so I had a bigger Navy attachment than I did a Marine attachment because of the engineering. So I produce 4 to 5 nuclear graduate types for the Navy per year than most schools.
That's an interesting way to finish your career. I mean, did you learn a little bit about the War of Northern Aggression while you were there as well?
I did, and I know where Stonewall lives and support and everything else. And the VMI staff are all wearing the Army uniform, even though they may not have spent a day in the military. So those are ongoing challenges of that ethics and customs of campus life. But we had a great 4 years there, and a
full colonel by that time?
I'm a full colonel. I was a full colonel when I took over the battalion. So the battalion, I was a colonel then. So went to the Naval ROTC and I stayed there 4 years. Retired at 30.
And what year was that?
2001.
What month?
September.
September of 2001.
1st, 2001.
It's an interesting time for you to end your military career.
Because if it had been any later, I probably wouldn't have been able to get out because they had that stop-loss program shortly after that. And I was out and retired at that point, and a lot of my friends didn't get out right away.
Why don't you wrap it up with just telling us what you've been doing since 2001?
Well, I retired from the Marine Corps. I got a job working for Ducks Unlimited. It's a conservation program, and I was a regional director, and the job I was given was up in central Illinois. So we moved from Virginia to Illinois. I could pick anywhere to live. I lived in Springfield, and I did that program for about 5-6 years. And since then, for the last 8 or 9 years, I've been working for Air Evac Life Team. I'm a helicopter pilot for Air Medical Service, and I've been doing that for the last 8 years now, and loving it more.
Still flying.
Still flying.
I think that's what it's all about, it sounds like.
Yes, sir. It is.
Well, Gary, this has been quite a ride we've been on. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. It was fascinating to hear the stories about Desert Storm, Desert Shield and Desert Storm. Your war was different than a lot of other folks, but they always turn out that way. Everybody's got their own very focused perspective of what was going on. But it was great to get the insights. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
And thank you for joining us.